"Sir, you need to come with us." The command echoed through the silent cabin as two security guards gripped Marcus Thorne's arms. Phones rose, passengers whispered. The flight attendant smirked while a businessman snickered, each convinced they were witnessing justice. Marcus said nothing. His hoodie, his calm. His silence, all mistaken for guilt. But beneath the humiliation burned precision, control, and authority. They thought they were removing a threat. In truth, they were assaulting a federal agent mid-operation. When Marcus reached for his wallet, the laughter died. The flash of gold from his FBI badge would rewrite the meaning of power and end more than a few careers before the plane ever took off. The low hum of the Boeing 757 was a familiar symphony to Marcus Thorne. It was the sound of transit, of moving from one life to another, from the rigid high-stakes world of his profession to the quiet personal world that was now calling him home. He leaned his head against the cool plastic of the window frame, the vibrations of the engines a steady pulse against his skull. Outside the tarmac of JFK was a chaotic ballet of ground crews, baggage carts, and fuel trucks, all moving with a purpose that felt alien to the turmoil in his own heart. He was flying to Denver, not for work for once, but for family. The text from his sister Alani had been stark and terrifying. "Mom's in the hospital. It's her heart again. The doctors are saying, you should come home, Marcus." He had booked the first available flight, a 6-hour cross-country journey, crammed into seat 24B, a middle seat in the economy cabin. He didn't mind. For all the high-level clearances and access his job afforded him, Marcus preferred anonymity. He wore a simple grey hoodie, the hood down over a plain black t-shirt, comfortable jeans, and worn-in sneakers. He carried a single, unassuming black backpack that held little more than a change of clothes, a worn paperback, and the tools of his trade, which remained unseen and unspoken. He looked like a student, a musician, a man lost in thought, anything but what he was. As passengers shuffled down the narrow aisle, jostling for overhead bin space, Marcus kept to himself, his long legs folded into the tight space. He'd already stowed his backpack under the seat in front of him, a habit born from years of needing to keep his essentials close. He just wanted to be a ghost on this flight, to close his eyes and let the miles dissolve until he could be by his mother's side. "Excuse me, sir. Your bag." The voice was sharp, laced with an impatient authority that cut through his thoughts. He looked up to see a flight attendant with a severe blonde bob and a name tag that read, Karen. Her smile was a tight painted-on line that didn't reach her eyes. Her gaze was fixed on the floor by his feet. "It has to be completely under the seat, sir. All the way for takeoff." Marcus glanced down. His backpack was already as far under the seat as it could go, flush against the metal support bar. "It is," he replied, his voice calm and low. "It won't go any further." Karen's smile tightened another fraction of a millimeter. "It needs to be completely out of the way. It's a federal regulation." She spoke with the exaggerated slowness one might use for a child or someone who didn't understand English. Marcus simply nodded, reached down, and fruitlessly pushed the bag again. It didn't move. "That's as far as it goes," he repeated, meeting her gaze. There was no defiance in his tone, only a statement of fact. She held his gaze for a moment, too long, a flicker of something, annoyance, suspicion in her eyes. She finally gave a curtain nod and moved on her heels, clicking on the cabin floor. Marcus sighed quietly, the small, unnecessary interaction leaving a bitter taste. He knew the look. He had seen it his entire life. It was a look that assessed and dismissed him in a single glance, a look that saw his skin color and his hoodie before it ever saw the man. The seats on either side of him filled up. On his left by the window was a young woman who immediately put on noise-cancelling headphones and opened a laptop. On his right in the aisle seat, a man in a crisp, expensive-looking suit grunted as he squeezed his bulky frame into the space. He smelled of overpriced cologne and entitlement. "Unbelievable," the man muttered, wrestling with his seatbelt. "Can't believe they cram us in like this. I should be in first class." He glanced at Marcus, his eyes sweeping over him with unconcealed disdain. "Some of us have important business to attend to. Marcus offered a tight, polite nod and turned his attention back to the window, hoping to signal his disinterest in conversation. The man, however, wasn't done. He adjusted himself noisily, his elbow jutting sharply into Marcus's ribs. "Sorry," the man said without a hint of sincerity. He introduced himself unprompted. "Chad Covington, Covington Equity. We're closing a massive deal in Denver." "You, Marcus," he replied simply, not offering a last name or a profession. Chad snorted softly. "Marcus, right. Visiting family, I suppose." The question was framed as a guess, but it felt like a condescending assumption. "Something like that," Marcus said, finally pulling out his own earbuds and placing them in his ears, a clear social curtain. He scrolled through his phone, finding a calming playlist of instrumental jazz, and closed his eyes as the final boarding announcement crackled over the intercom. The plane pushed back from the gate, and the safety demonstration began. Marcus felt a vibration and opened his eyes. Chad was on his phone talking loudly. "Listen, Robert, just have the contracts ready. I land at 5:00. I'll be at the office by 6:00. This deal is non-negotiable. We crush them. You hear me? Crush them." Flight attendant Karen reappeared, her eyes scanning the aisle. She walked past two other passengers who were also on their phones but stopped abruptly at their row. Her focus, however, wasn't on Chad. It was on Marcus. "Sir," she said, her voice sharp again, "your phone needs to be in airplane mode now. We are preparing for takeoff." Marcus looked at her, then at Chad, who was still loudly discussing his business deal. He didn't say a word, but simply held up his phone to show her the little airplane icon already illuminated on the screen. He had put it in airplane mode the moment the cabin door was sealed. Karen's face flushed slightly, but she didn't apologize. Instead, she turned to Chad. Her tone softened immediately. "And you too, sir. If you could please finish your call. Thank you so much for your cooperation." Chad gave her a dismissive wave. Yeah, 1 minute." He continued his call. Karen smiled graciously and walked away. Marcus watched the exchange, a familiar weary weight settling in his chest. It was the blatant double standard, the immediate assumption of his guilt, and Chad's importance. He saw the young woman in the window seat glance over her laptop, her brow furrowed, having noticed the same thing. She gave Marcus a small, sympathetic look before turning back to her screen. He leaned his head back and closed his eyes again, trying to push it all away. He had to focus on his mom. These petty slights, this casual prejudice, it was just noise. It couldn't touch him. He wouldn't let it. But as the engines roared to life and the plane began to speed down the runway, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The air in the cabin already felt charged with a tension that had nothing to do with atmospheric pressure. The plane climbed through the clouds, leveling out at its cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign pinged off, and the cabin slowly came to life with the rustle of magazines, the glow of screens, and the low murmur of conversation. Marcus tried to lose himself in his book, a well-themed biography of John Coltrane, but the man beside him made it nearly impossible. Chad Covington was a whirlwind of restless energy. He drummed his fingers on the armrest, sighed loudly every few minutes, and seemed physically incapable of staying within the confines of his own seat. His knee pressed against Marcus's leg, his shoulder periodically bumped into his. Each time Marcus would subtly shift away, trying to reclaim his sliver of personal space, a silent, polite negotiation that Chad seemed either oblivious or indifferent to. When the beverage service began, Chad flagged down Karen with an imperious snap of his fingers. "Double scotch top shelf if you have it, and keep them coming." Karen beamed at him. "Of course, Mr. Two Covington, right away." When she reached their row, she handed Chad his drink with a flourish before turning to Marcus. Her professional smile vanished, replaced by a look of flat indifference. "And for you—" "Just a water, please," Marcus said. She poured the water and handed it to him, her fingers brushing his. He could have sworn he felt her recoil ever so slightly. He took the cup without comment, placing it on his tray table. He was thirsty, but the small act already felt exhausting. An hour into the flight, Marcus needed to use the restroom. He glanced at Chad, who had his laptop open on his tray table, engrossed in a spreadsheet. "Excuse me?" Marcus said politely. Chad looked up, his face a mask of annoyance. "Are you serious? I'm in the middle of something here. Sorry, I'll be quick." With a dramatic put-upon groan, Chad slammed his laptop shut, gathered his things, and heaved himself into the aisle to let Marcus pass. The performance drew the attention of the passengers nearby. Marcus squeezed past, murmuring another apology, his face impassive. He walked toward the lavatory at the rear of the cabin. It was occupied. As he stood waiting, he stretched his legs, rolling his neck to ease the stiffness from the cramped seat. He gazed absently out the small porthole window in the galley door, watching the endless expanse of white clouds. From the corner of his eye, he saw Karen emerge from the forward galley. She saw him standing there and froze her hand, clutching the curtain. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion, as if his mere presence in the aisle was a violation. He saw her lean over to another flight attendant and whisper something, her gaze darting towards him. The other flight attendant looked over at him, her expression hardening. Marcus ignored it. This was their problem, their prejudice. He was just a man waiting for the restroom. When the door finally opened and a passenger exited, he went inside, closing the door firmly behind him. When he returned to his seat a few minutes later, the atmosphere had palpably shifted. Chad was already seated, looking even more irritable than before. As Marcus settled back into 24B, Chad leaned in close, his voice a low, accusatory hiss. "What were you doing back there for so long?" Snooping around, Marcus turned to him, his expression calm, but his eyes sharp. "I was waiting to use the restroom." "Right," Chad sneered. "You were lingering. I saw you staring at the cockpit door." This was a lie. The cockpit was at the opposite end of the plane. The lavatory is at the back of the plane. Marcus stated, his voice even. "I was nowhere near the cockpit." "Don't play games with me," Chad snapped, his voice rising in volume. "I know your type. Always looking for an opportunity, always causing trouble." A few heads turned. The woman in the window seat pointedly angled her laptop screen away, trying to create a barrier. Marcus took a slow, deep breath, his training kicking in. De-escalate. Do not engage. Do not become the threat they want you to be. "I'm not looking for any trouble," Marcus said, his voice low and steady. He picked up his book, attempting to signal the end of the conversation. But Chad was emboldened now. He felt the weight of an invisible audience, and the silent approval of the flight attendant who had been watching them. He saw himself as the protector of the plane, the vigilant citizen. He pressed the call button above his head. A few seconds later, Karen arrived, a look of faux concern on her face. "Is everything all right, sir?" she asked, directing the question solely to Chad. "No, everything is not all right," Chad declared, pointing a thumb at Marcus. "This guy was lurking in the galley for 10 minutes, staring at the crew. Now he's getting aggressive with me. I don't feel safe." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It was a complete fabrication, a narrative woven from prejudice and paranoia. Marcus slowly lowered his book, his heart rate steady, but a cold anger beginning to form in the pit of his stomach. He looked at Karen, waiting for her to be a professional to assess the situation impartially. He was disappointed. She turned to Marcus, her face a stern mask. "Sir, we've had multiple reports of suspicious behavior. You were seen lingering near a secure area, and now you are intimidating another passenger. Is there a problem?" The use of the word multiple was a calculated lie designed to corner him. It was her word and Chad's against his. "There is no problem," Marcus said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I went to the restroom. This gentleman is mistaken." "Mistaken?" Chad scoffed. "I know what I saw. You were acting shifty." The flight attendant saw it too. Karen nodded gravely. "Your behavior is making other passengers and the crew uncomfortable, sir. I'm going to have to insist that you remain in your seat and do not cause any more disturbances for the remainder of the flight." It was a warning and a verdict delivered in one breath. He had been tried and found guilty without any evidence. He was now officially the problem passenger. The threat. He saw the looks from the people across the aisle, a mixture of fear, suspicion, and judgment. They heard the official tone of the flight attendant, the confident accusation from the man in the suit, and they saw him a black man in a hoodie. For them, the equation was simple. Marcus simply said, "Understood," and picked up his book again. But he wasn't reading. The words on the page were a blur. He was listening, observing. He heard Karen walk to the front of the plane. He heard the click of the intercom phone being picked up, and he heard the muffled, urgent tones of her voice as she spoke to the captain. The trap was being set, and he was walking right into it, one quiet, compliant step at a time. Captain Frank Davies ran a tight ship. With over 30 years of flying experience, he viewed the cockpit as his sanctuary and the airplane as his kingdom. Punctuality was his religion. A smooth, on-time flight was a successful flight. Anything that threatened that schedule, be it weather mechanical issues or unruly passengers, was an enemy to be dealt with swiftly and decisively. He was currently sipping a cup of lukewarm coffee, listening to the steady drone of the engines and the calm professional chatter from air traffic control. It was a routine flight, a simple milk run from New York to Denver. The chime of the cabin phone broke the monotony. His first officer, a younger man named Ben Carter, answered it. "Flight deck. Carter speaking." Ben listened for a moment, his brow furrowing. He covered the receiver and turned to the captain. "It's Karen from the main cabin. She's got a situation. A passenger in Economy 24B. She says he's been acting suspiciously since boarding." Captain Davies sighed. "A suspicious passenger." The term was frustratingly vague and could mean anything from a nervous first-time flyer to a genuine threat. 99% of the time, it was nothing. But you could never ignore the 1%. "Put her on speaker," Davies commanded. Ben pressed a button, and Karen's tense voice filled the small cockpit, and he was loitering near the aft galley for a very long time, just staring. It made the other crew members uneasy. Then another passenger, a Mr. Coington in 24C, reported that the man became aggressive and confrontational with him. Mr. Coington says he doesn't feel safe. Davies pinched the bridge of his nose. This was escalating. Aggressive. How Karen? Was he physical? Did he make any direct threats? Well, no, not a direct threat. Captain Karen admitted a slight hesitation in her voice. But his tone, it was very intimidating. He's a large man, and he was defensive. Mr. Coington is quite shaken. He's a very important businessman, a frequent flyer with us. He's certain the passenger is trouble. Davies chewed on this. No physical contact, no explicit threats. It was all subjective tone, defensive, shifty. These were words that relied entirely on the accuser's perception. But he also had a crew member and another passenger, a supposedly reputable one, corroborating the story. His mind ran through the checklist of protocols. "What's the passenger's demeanor now?" he asked. "He's being quiet. Too quiet, if you ask me. It's like the calm before the storm. He's just sitting there pretending to read a book. But I can feel him watching everything." Karen said, her voice filled with manufactured drama. She was building a case brick by brick out of her own biases. She had an instinct. She told herself. She could spot trouble. And this man, with his quiet intensity and his refusal to be intimidated, was trouble. In her mind, she was the hero of this story, the vigilant protector in the sky. She imagined the headlines that could have been the ones she was preventing. She conveniently omitted the details of the initial confrontation over the backpack or the clear double standard she'd shown regarding the use of cell phones. She presented only the parts that fit her narrative of a dangerous man who needed to be controlled. Back in the cockpit, Davies was weighing his options. They were still 2 hours out from Denver. He could have the crew continue to monitor the passenger, but if things escalated mid-air, it would be a much more dangerous situation. If he did nothing and something happened, the responsibility would be his. If he diverted the plane, it would cost the airline hundreds of thousands of dollars and trigger a massive investigation, all potentially for nothing. There was a third option. Have the passenger removed upon landing. No, that wasn't good enough. If Karen and this Coington fellow were to be believed, the threat was now. The unwritten rule of the skies was to eliminate any potential threat at the earliest opportunity. First Officer Carter, listening to the exchange, felt a prickle of unease. "Captain, it sounds a bit thin, intimidating tone and too quiet. Are we sure we have enough to act on? It's not just that Ben." Davies countered, his voice firm. He was the captain. The decision was his. "We have a nervous crew and a passenger who has explicitly stated he feels unsafe. In this day and age, we don't take chances. We don't wait for a situation to get out of hand. We get ahead of it." He was thinking of the schedule. He was thinking of the airline's liability. He was thinking of his own record. He was not, however, thinking about the man in seat 24B. To Davies, he wasn't a person with a story or a destination. He was a variable, a potential problem that needed to be solved. Karen Davies said into the phone, his decision made. "Is the passenger being compliant now?" "Yes, Captain. He's in his seat." "Good. Keep it that way. Don't engage with him any further unless absolutely necessary. I'm making a call. We'll have airport security meet us at the gate. We're removing him from the flight." A wave of triumphant relief washed over Karen. "Thank you, Captain. I think that's the wise choice." She felt vindicated. Her instincts had been right. "Just keep the cabin calm," Davies ordered. "We'll handle it on the ground." He hung up the phone and looked at his co-pilot. "Get on the horn to Denver Dispatch. Tell them we have a disruptive passenger. Potential security threat. Level 2. We require law enforcement to meet Flight 719 at the gate upon arrival. No sirens, just a quiet removal." Ben Carter hesitated for a second before nodding. "Yes, Captain." He turned to the radio, his voice professional and steady, as he relayed the message that would set an irreversible chain of events into motion. Captain Davies took another sip of his coffee. The problem was handled. The threat would be neutralized. The flight would be back on schedule within minutes of landing. He had done his job. He had no idea of the catastrophic miscalculation he had just made. Down in the cabin, Marcus Thorne turned a page in his book, feeling the slight change in the engine's pitch as the plane began its initial descent. He was one step closer to his mother, blissfully unaware that he was now a marked man, flying toward a confrontation he didn't start, but one he would be forced to finish. The descent into Denver was tense. The fabricated drama had poisoned the air in the cabin. Passengers in the surrounding rows threw furtive, nervous glances at Marcus, whispering behind their hands. He felt the weight of their collective gaze, a suffocating blanket of suspicion. He did nothing to acknowledge it. He closed his book, returned it to the pocket of the seat in front of him, and stared out the window, watching the sprawling suburbs of Denver emerge from beneath the clouds. His face was a stoic mask, but inside his mind was racing, analyzing, and preparing. His training had taught him to remain calm under pressure, to observe his surroundings, and to never ever make the first move. He knew he was being set up. The performative fear from Chad and the vindictive diligence of Karen were components of a trap. He didn't know what their endgame was, but he knew it wouldn't be pleasant. His only goal was to get off this plane without incident and get to the hospital. Everything else was just noise. The plane touched down with a gentle bump, and the relief that usually filled the cabin upon landing was replaced with a palpable anxiety. As the aircraft taxied toward the gate, Karen's voice came over the intercom, but it was different from her usual cheerful post-flight announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened until the aircraft has come to a complete stop at the gate and the captain has turned off the seatbelt sign. We will also be deplaning in a slightly different order today, so please await instructions from the flight crew. Thank you." Her eyes found Marcus in the crowd. There was a glint of triumph in them. This was it. The end game. Marcus met her gaze for a brief second before turning his attention back to the window. He unbuckled his seatbelt, quietly ready. The plane docked at the jet bridge with a soft thud. The engines spooled down into silence, but the seatbelt sign remained on. A confused murmur rippled through the cabin. Then they saw it. Through the windows, Two figures in dark blue uniforms and black vests marked airport security were walking briskly down the jet bridge. Chad Coington leaned over a smug, venomous whisper in Marcus's ear. "Looks like your trip is over, pal. Should have behaved yourself." Marcus didn't respond. He simply reached down and slowly pulled his backpack out from under the seat, placing it on his lap. He could feel his heart beating a slow, steady drum. This was no longer about de-escalation. This was about survival. The forward cabin door opened, not with the usual friendly greeting from the ground crew, but with a sharp click. Captain Davies stood in the doorway, his face grim. Behind him were the two security officers. One was a burly older man with a weathered face and a permanent scowl. His name tag read Riggs. The other was younger, barely out of his 20s, with a nervous energy about him. His tag read Miller. Karen immediately pointed toward their row. "That's him. Seat 24B, the man in the grey hoodie." The entire front section of the plane turned to stare. The whispers stopped, replaced by the silent, invasive glow of dozens of cell phone screens, turning on, all pointed in his direction. Officer Riggs started down the aisle, his presence filling the narrow space. He moved with a heavy-footed authority, his hand resting on the equipment on his belt. The younger officer Miller followed a few paces behind, looking uncertain. Riggs stopped at their row, his shadow falling over Marcus. He didn't address him directly at first. He looked at Chad. "Are you the passenger who reported the disturbance?" "That's me," Chad said, puffing out his chest. "Chad Covington. This man was aggressive. He was threatening me. I felt my life was in danger." Riggs nodded, accepting the statement as gospel. He then turned his full attention to Marcus. His eyes were cold and devoid of any curiosity or desire for understanding. He saw a complaint, a suspect, and a simple solution. "Sir," Riggs said, his voice a low growl, "you need to gather your belongings and come with us now." Marcus looked up at him, his expression unreadable. His voice when he spoke was calm and measured a stark contrast to the charged atmosphere. "May I ask what this is about, officer?" The simple question seemed to enrage Riggs. "There's no asking, there's doing. The captain wants you off his plane. You've been identified as a security risk. Now let's go." "Don't make this difficult." "I haven't done anything wrong," Marcus stated simply. "It wasn't a plea. It was a fact. I've been sitting in my seat reading a book. There seems to be a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding," Riggs snarled, leaning closer, "is you thinking you have a choice here? Get up now, or I will physically remove you." Out of the corner of his eye, Marcus could see the woman in the window seat shrinking back, her eyes wide with fear. He saw the smirks on the faces of Karen and Chad. He saw the sea of phones all recording his humiliation, and he saw the hesitation in the eyes of the younger officer Miller, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Marcus knew he had a decision to make. He could comply, be let off the plane, and try to sort it out in a quiet office somewhere away from prying eyes. That was the logical professional choice. But something inside him, a deep simmering anger at the injustice of it all, at being profiled and condemned without a trial, balked at the idea. His mother was waiting. He had been wronged, and he was not going to be paraded off this plane like a criminal. He took a slow breath. "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what crime I'm being accused of." That was all Riggs needed to hear. The challenge to his authority was the final trigger. "That's it," he grunted. "You've had your chance." He reached out his thick fingers, grabbing Marcus's arm in a vice-like grip. "You're coming with us one way or another." The cabin erupted in gasps. The moment of confrontation had arrived. The moment Officer Riggs's hand clamped down on his bicep. A switch flipped in Marcus's mind. The world seemed to slow down. The gasps of the passengers, the smug look on Chad's face, the frantic recording of cell phones, it all faded into a dull peripheral roar. His training, honed over years of high-stress situations, took over. His body remained relaxed, but his mind became a steel trap, assessing every angle, every threat, every possible outcome. "Take your hand off me," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous frequency. It was not a request, it was a command. Riggs laughed a short, ugly bark. You're in no position to be giving orders." He tightened his grip, trying to haul Marcus to his feet. Marcus didn't resist with brute force. He simply shifted his weight using Riggs's own momentum against him, anchoring himself to the seat. For a man of his size, Riggs was surprised by the unmovable solidity of the man in the hoodie. It was like trying to pull a statue out of the ground. "I'm giving you one last chance to do this the easy way." Riggs growled, his face turning red with exertion and fury. "Miller, get his other arm." The younger officer, Miller, hesitated. His training told him this was wrong. They hadn't even tried to interview the subject properly. They were acting as muscle based on a flight attendant's hearsay. But a direct order was a direct order, and the intimidating presence of his senior partner left him little choice. He moved forward reluctantly and took hold of Marcus's other arm. "Sir, please," Miller said, his voice strained. "Please, just cooperate. Let's talk about this outside." "I've been trying to talk," Marcus replied, his gaze locked on Riggs. He's the one who isn't listening. With both officers now pulling, Marcus knew he couldn't remain seated without escalating the situation physically, something he absolutely would not do. He allowed them to pull him to his feet, but he did so with a slow, deliberate control that unnerved them. He was not a man being manhandled. He was a man allowing himself to be moved. He stood up in the narrow aisle, his height making him tower over both officers. He shrugged their hands off his arms with a powerful but non-aggressive movement. He picked up his backpack, slinging it over one shoulder. "I will walk," he said. "You do not need to touch me." For a moment, it seemed like they might comply. But Chad Coington, never one to let a moment of drama pass him by, decided to escalate things further. "Don't let him fool you," Chad shouted from his seat. "He's trying to trick you. He was aggressive with me. He's dangerous." That was all the encouragement Riggs needed. His authority had been challenged, his physical strength tested, and now a concerned citizen was cheering him on. He lunged forward and shoved Marcus hard in the back. "Move it now." The shove sent Marcus stumbling forward a step. The passengers in the aisle seats recoiled. It was a gratuitous, unnecessary act of aggression, and it crossed the line. The entire cabin was now a silent witness to a clear case of assault. Marcus stopped. He didn't turn around. He stood perfectly still for a count of 3, his back to the officers. The tension was unbearable. Every phone was raised, every eye wide. Slowly, he turned his head, his gaze finding Riggs. There was no anger in his eyes now. There was something far colder, far more terrifying. Absolute focus. "You made a mistake," Marcus said, his voice barely a whisper. Yet it seemed to carry through the entire silent cabin. Riggs, mistaking the quiet for fear, shoved him again. "I'm the one in charge here. Keep walking." This time Marcus was prepared. He absorbed the impact without moving an inch. He then began to walk slowly and deliberately up the aisle toward the front of the plane. Riggs and Miller followed close behind their hands, hovering near his back, ready to push him again. The walk was the longest of his life. It was a gauntlet of shame, a parade of prejudice. He passed row after row of silent, staring faces. He saw fear-pity, and in some, a disturbing flicker of satisfaction. He was the spectacle they would talk about for weeks, the story they would tell their friends. The dangerous man removed from their flight. He kept his head held high. His stride was even. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing him stumble or show any sign of weakness. As he passed Karen, who stood near the galley, with her arms crossed, a smirk of vindication on her face, he met her eyes. Her smirk faltered under the weight of his steady, unnerving gaze. He didn't need to say a word. He knew, and she knew, that this was her doing. Captain Davies stood at the open door of the plane. His arms also crossed his expression, one of stern disapproval aimed at Marcus. He was the judge who had passed sentence, and he was there to ensure it was carried out. Marcus stepped out of the cabin and onto the jet bridge. The air outside was cooler, but the atmosphere was even more charged. The world of the airplane was behind him, but the confrontation was far from over. Riggs and Miller flanked him, guiding him toward the terminal. The captain and Karen stood in the doorway watching. They were about halfway down the enclosed walkway, out of sight of most of the passengers, but still in clear view of the flight crew, when Riggs decided one final act of dominance was necessary. He grabbed Marcus's arm again. "We'll take it from here," he said, his voice full of growly authority. "You're being detained for questioning." Marcus stopped walking. He looked at Riggs's hand on his arm. He looked at the nervous younger officer. He looked back at the captain, who was watching with an air of detached finality. This was the place. This was the time. He had given them every chance to de-escalate, to listen, to act with professionalism. They had refused at every turn. They had chosen prejudice over procedure, force over reason. They had publicly humiliated him and assaulted him. And now they were about to learn the true identity of the quiet man in seat 24B. The jet bridge was a sterile, impersonal tube connecting the plane to the terminal. It became the stage for a dramatic reversal of power that no one present could have anticipated. Officer Riggs's grip was tight on Marcus's arm, a physical assertion of his control over the situation. "You are making a grave mistake," Marcus said, his voice calm and clear, echoing slightly in the enclosed space. He wasn't looking at Riggs anymore. He was looking past him at Captain Davies, who still stood in the doorway of the aircraft. Riggs scoffed. "I've heard that one before. Save your sob story for the supervisor, buddy. You're in a world of trouble." "No," Marcus replied, turning his gaze back to Riggs. The cold intensity in his eyes made the officer flinch. "You are. You have assaulted a passenger without cause, and you are now illegally detaining a federal agent in the performance of his duties." The claim was so audacious, so out of place, that it was met with disbelief. Karen, who had been watching with satisfaction, let out a short, derisive laugh. Chad Coington, who had crept to the front of the plane to watch the final act, called out, "A federal agent in a hoodie." "Yeah, right. Tell us another one." Riggs smirked, emboldened by the support. "A federal agent. Son, I've been doing this job for 20 years. I know what a Fed looks like, and you ain't it." Marcus slowly raised his free hand. "Officer Miller," he said, addressing the younger, nervous cop, "I suggest you advise your partner to release me immediately." Miller looked from Marcus's calm, commanding face to Riggs's angry, reeling one. A seed of doubt was planted in his mind. Something was very wrong here. This man was too calm, too confident, too in control for someone in his position. "Just shut up and cuff him, Riggs," Karen urged from the doorway. That was the last mistake she would make. With a fluid motion that was shockingly fast, Marcus reached inside his hoodie. Riggs tensed his hand, instinctively moving toward his sidearm. "Don't even think about it," he yelled. But Marcus wasn't reaching for a weapon. He pulled out a simple black leather wallet. He didn't flip it open with a dramatic flourish. He simply held it in the palm of his hand and used his thumb to reveal its contents. Inside, nestled in custom-cut leather, was a gleaming golden badge. Above it, in a separate window, was a government identification card with his photograph. The bold letters across the top were unmistakable. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Below his picture, his name and title were printed in clear official text. Special Agent Marcus Thorne. Silence. A profound, deafening silence fell over the jet bridge. The world seemed to grind to a halt. The smug smirk on Riggs's face dissolved, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pure, unadulterated shock. His hand, which had been gripping Marcus's arm like a vice, recoiled as if it had been burned. He stumbled back a step, his eyes wide with horror. Officer Miller's face went completely white. He looked like he was going to be sick. He could feel his career, his future, evaporating before his very eyes. In the doorway of the plane, Karen's derisive laugh died in her throat, replaced by a strangled gasp. Her hands flew to her mouth, her perfectly applied makeup unable to hide the terror that flooded her eyes. Captain Davies's professional detachment shattered. His jaw dropped, and the color drained from his face. He gripped the doorframe for support, his mind struggling to process the cataclysmic error in judgment he had just overseen. Chad Coington, peering from behind the captain, simply froze, his arrogant sneer wiped clean. Marcus didn't say a word. He let the badge speak for him. He let the weight of what they had done sink in. He held the credentials out for a few seconds longer, ensuring everyone had seen them, ensuring the reality of the situation was absolute. Then he calmly tucked the wallet back inside his hoodie. He looked at Riggs, who was now stammering, unable to form a coherent sentence. We had a report. Riggs sputtered, his voice trembling. You had a report based on prejudice and lies. Marcus stated, his voice like ice. And instead of investigating, instead of performing your duties with a shred of professionalism, you chose to escalate. You chose to assault me. You chose to publicly humiliate me. All of it, he added, his gaze sweeping over the horrified faces in the doorway, is on camera not just from the passengers, but from the airport's own security feeds. He took a step toward them, and this time they were the ones who shrank back. The power dynamic had not just shifted. It had been inverted with the force of a tectonic plate. He pulled out his phone. He didn't scroll for a contact. He dialed a number from memory. It rang only once before it was picked up. Director, Marcus said into the phone, his voice steady and professional. This is Special Agent Thorne. I have a situation at Denver International. My transit has been compromised. I've been detained by local airport security. I need you to contact the head of the Denver field office and the airport director. Tell them to meet me at gate C34. And director, he paused, his eyes finding Captain Davies. Have them ground Global Air Flight 719. No one gets off, no one gets on. This aircraft is now part of a federal investigation. He listened for a moment, then said, Yes, sir, thank you. He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. He looked at the group of stunned, terrified people. My mother is in the hospital, he said, his voice now laced with a raw personal anger that was more intimidating than any shout. I was flying home to see her. Because of you, I have been delayed. Because of you, I have been forced to reveal my status, potentially compromising an active investigation I am involved in. And because of you, he said, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet. Every single one of you is about to learn a very hard lesson about consequences. The 20 minutes that followed were a masterclass in controlled chaos. The jet bridge, once a simple passageway, transformed into an impromptu command center. Special Agent Marcus Thorne was no longer the quiet man in 24B. He was the undisputed authority, and everyone else was a suspect in an investigation that had just begun. The first to arrive was the airport director of security, a harried-looking man named Frank Chen, followed closely by two stern-faced individuals in dark suits who introduced themselves as agents from the FBI's Denver field office. One of them, a tall, imposing woman named Special Agent Diaz, took the lead. She greeted Marcus not as a victim, but as a colleague. Agent Thorne. Diaz, what's the situation? The situation, Agent Diaz. Marcus began, his voice ringing with clarity, is that Global Air Flight 7199, under the command of Captain Frank Davis, allowed a passenger to be illegally removed from the aircraft based on a false report filed by flight attendant Karen Miller and corroborated by passenger Chad Coington. The removal was executed with excessive force by airport security officers Riggs and Miller, resulting in assault. He laid out the facts clinically without emotion. As he spoke, the color continued to drain from the faces of the accused. Karen Miller was visibly trembling, muttering, "No, no, no," under her breath. Captain Davies stood rigid, his face a mask of disbelief, as if hoping this was all a nightmare from which he would soon awake. Agent Diaz's gaze was sharp and unforgiving. She turned to the airport security director. Mr. Chen, your officers are to be disarmed and escorted to an interview room immediately. Confiscate their body cameras. We will be reviewing all footage. They are not to have contact with one another. Is that understood? Yes, of course, Agent Diaz. Right away, Chen stammered, already speaking into his radio. Officer Riggs looked as though he might collapse. The younger officer, Miller, just looked utterly broken. He offered no resistance as two other airport officials arrived to escort them away. His head hung in shame. Next, Diaz turned her attention to the aircraft. Captain Davies' flight attendant, Miller Mr. Coington, you will remain here. You will be questioned shortly. Do not speak to each other. Do not use your phones. Chad Coington, who had built an empire on bluster and intimidation, finally found his voice, though it was weak and greedy. Now see here, I am a private citizen. You can't detain me. I have rights. The second FBI agent, a quiet man who hadn't yet spoken, stepped forward. He flipped open his own credentials. Special Agent Harris. Sir, you are currently a material witness and potential suspect in the interference of a federal officer's duties and filing a false report. I assure you we can detain you. And I strongly advise you to exercise your right to remain silent until you have a lawyer present. Chad's mouth snapped shut. The threat of actual serious legal jeopardy had finally pierced his thick skull of entitlement. The passengers on the plane had been held in confused silence. But now the gravity of the situation was becoming clear. The sight of FBI agents on the jet bridge confirmed that this was far more than a simple case of a disruptive passenger. Marcus turned to Agent Diaz. The passengers have been through enough, and many of them have footage of the incident. Please have your team take statements and collect contact information from anyone in the surrounding rows, especially the woman in seat 24A. Then let them deplane. He added, his voice softening slightly. And please check on her. She looked terrified. Diaz nodded, respecting his command of the situation. Consider it done. With the immediate scene secured, a moment of quiet fell between Marcus and Diaz. The director was emphatic, Diaz said in a low voice. He mentioned your testimony in the Vanguard case. Marcus's jaw tightened. This incident could have compromised my cover. My face is all over dozens of cell phones now. We need to get ahead of that. Diaz understood immediately. The Vanguard case was a major domestic terrorism investigation. Marcus was a key witness set to provide testimony that would dismantle a dangerous militia group. His anonymity was paramount. This was no longer just about assault and racial profiling. This was a potential breach of national security. We'll handle the footage, Diaz assured him. We'll issue a statement about a security training exercise, classify the incident. It'll be messy, but we can contain it. Good, Marcus said. He then looked toward the terminal. Now, if you'll excuse me, I still have somewhere I need to be. He walked past the stunned trio of Karen Captain Davies and Chad Coington without a second glance. They were no longer his problem. They were now cogs in the vast, unforgiving machinery of the federal justice system. As he entered the bustling terminal, his phone buzzed. It was his sister Alani. He answered his voice instantly, losing its hard edge, replaced by the warmth and worry of a loving son. Alani, I'm here. I'm at the airport. I'm so sorry I got held up. How is she? How's Mom? He listened, his face a mixture of relief and sorrow. He walked through the airport, a man moving with renewed purpose. The chaos on the jet bridge already fading as a more important reality took its place. The fight at the airport was over. But the fight for his mother was just beginning. The fallout from Flight 717 was not a slow burn. It was an explosion. The consequences were swift and absolute. Within days, the lives of those who had wronged Marcus Thorne were systematically dismantled. Flight attendant Karen Miller and Captain Frank Davies were fired, their careers in aviation permanently terminated. Karen also faced federal charges for interfering with an agent and filing a false report. Officer Riggs was dismissed from the airport authority, facing a civil rights lawsuit that would leave him in financial ruin. As for Chad Coington, the arrogant businessman, the FBI's brief interest in his affairs was enough to trigger a full-blown investigation into his company, causing his partners to oust him and his financial empire to crumble into dust. Global Air issued a graveling public apology and offered a substantial settlement, which Marcus had his lawyers immediately donate to a charity fighting for racial justice. He paid little attention to the news reports. He had won, but his focus had already shifted to a battle that mattered far more. He arrived at Rocky Mountain General Hospital to find his mother, Eleanor, awake, but frail. The chaos of the airport melted away, replaced by the quiet, sterile hum of medical equipment. He embraced his sister Alani and then took his place by his mother's bedside. His presence a silent, comforting anchor. For the next 2 weeks, he was not Special Agent Thorne. He was simply Marcus, a son, watching over his mother. He read to her shared quiet memories and held her hand as she slowly began to heal. One afternoon, a text from Agent Diaz confirmed his testimony in the Vanguard case was secure and his cover had been maintained. He sent a brief thank you and put the phone away. He looked at his mother, her breathing deep and steady as she slept. The victory on the jet bridge felt hollow compared to the profound peace of this moment. They had tried to judge him, to humiliate him, to cast him as a villain, but they had failed to see the man. And as he sat by his mother's side, he knew the real victory wasn't in their downfall, but in his being right where he was always meant to be home. What a story of poetic justice! It serves as a powerful reminder that you can never judge a book by its cover. The arrogance and prejudice of a few people set off a chain reaction that they could never have predicted, leading to their own downfall. This story isn't just about the shocking reveal of an FBI badge. It's about the quiet strength it takes to stand up to injustice, the importance of seeing the humanity in everyone, regardless of their appearance, and the ultimate triumph of truth over baseless assumptions. It shows that karma, when it arrives, can be as swift and decisive as the justice system itself. If this story moved you, please hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story. What did you think of the actions of the flight crew and passengers? Let us know in the comments below.